The Mafia King kidnapped her. She was supposed to be his trophy. She became his downfall. She was nobody. That was the truth of it. And Elena Voss had made her peace with it a long time ago. 24 years old. A translator for a law firm in Milan that paid her just enough to keep the lights on. 7 languages in her head and no one to speak them to. She ate lunch alone at the same cafe every day and told herself she preferred the quiet. She was nobody until the night she became the most dangerous kind of somebody. The file came in on a Tuesday. 40 pages of business correspondence in Russian, flagged urgent, sender anonymous. Standard enough. She made coffee, opened her laptop, and started on page 1. She reached page 47 at 11:14 p.m. The words stopped making sense in any business context. She went back, read again, cross-referenced the names in the header against everything she knew, which was considerable because Elena Voss noticed things. Politicians, judges, a police commissioner she recognized from last week's news, and next to each name, a price. Not a salary, not a fee, a price. Her hands went cold. She closed the laptop, stood up, grabbed her coat, and walked out of the office without telling anyone. She told herself she had misread it. She told herself her Russian was rusty. She told herself many things on the walk home, each one a little less convincing than the last. None of them were true. She was inside her apartment for exactly 11 minutes before the door opened. She hadn't given anyone a key. 2 men, black coats, no expression. The kind of stillness that isn't calm, it's practiced. Mr. Volkov would like to speak with you. Elena didn't scream. There was something in the way they said it, unhurried, almost polite, like this was a meeting that had always been on the calendar, that made screaming feel beside the point, like trying to argue with gravity. She walked to the car herself. The drive lasted 40 minutes outside Milan. She counted the seconds. She memorized streets until the streets became roads, and the roads became darkness, and she had nothing left to count but her own heartbeat. She expected concrete, chains, something that matched the cold weight of what was happening to her. Instead, a villa. Gardens behind stone walls, warm light in tall windows, the kind of house that appeared in architecture magazines, the kind where someone had decided long ago that beauty was simply another form of control. She was brought to a room upstairs, door locked from the outside. She sat on the edge of the bed, and she waited. He made her wait 2 hours. When the door finally opened, she understood immediately why everyone in that building moved the way they did. Quiet, precise, always slightly out of his way. Alexei Volkov did not enter a room. He occupied it, 6'2", dark hair, dark eyes, still in a way that most people never achieve. Not relaxed, not calm, but controlled the way a loaded weapon is controlled. The kind of man who had decided long ago that raising his voice was a waste of energy. He had never needed to raise it twice. He sat down across from her. He looked at her, not the way men usually looked at her, not at her face, not at her body, at her, like she was a document he was reading carefully, making note of every word. "You saw the file," he said, not a question. "I misunderstood it." "No," he said. "You didn't." He stood, walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. "You have until morning to decide if you're going to be honest with me." A beat. "I'd recommend it." He left. The lock clicked, and Elena Voss sat in the most beautiful room she had ever occupied and understood, for the first time in her life, what it meant to have no options at all. She told herself she was terrified. She was. But underneath the terror was something else, something she wouldn't name for a long time. She had spent her entire life being invisible. For the first time, someone had looked directly at her. She lasted 4 days before she tried to run. She had spent those 4 days mapping the villa with the same methodical attention she brought to everything. Staff rotation, camera angles, the single blind spot in the east garden where 2 patrol routes failed to overlap for approximately 90 seconds. She timed it perfectly. She made it all the way to the gate. Alexei was standing on the other side of it. He hadn't chased her. He hadn't sent anyone. He was simply there, hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, like she was a particularly interesting equation, and he was enjoying the process of solving it. "East Garden," he said. 90-second window. You timed it well. She said nothing. "Come back inside, Elena. You can't keep me here." "I am keeping you here. That's different from can't. If I scream, no one within earshot works for anyone but me." The slight tilt of his head. "And you already know that. You're not actually trying to escape. You're testing the edges." She hated that he was right. "Why does it matter?" she said. "I'll say nothing. I don't even know who those people are." Something shifted in his face, almost imperceptibly. "You know enough. The people whose names were on that list know a translator in Milan read it. They don't know how much you understand. That makes you dangerous to them." He paused. "I am the only thing standing between you and people who will not ask questions before they act." He turned and walked back toward the house. She followed. But before she reached the door, she heard it. A sound from the far side of the garden, low, short, unmistakable. She turned. One of the guards, on his knees, Alexei's hand at the back of his collar, not gripping, simply present, the way a blade is present before it moves. The guard was talking fast, apologizing, she thought, though the word didn't quite cover what his voice was doing. She understood enough. He was the one who had let her reach the gate. Someone had paid him to look away. Alexei said 4 words she couldn't fully catch. Then he let go. The guard didn't get up. Alexei walked back toward her like the temperature of the evening hadn't changed at all. "Still think I can't keep you here," he said quietly. She said nothing. She followed him inside. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she understood something she had been avoiding. The danger in this house wasn't only around her. Some of it was walking directly in front of her. And some part of her, the part that noticed things, the part that had always paid attention to what other people missed, was not entirely afraid of it. On the 6th day, she found the room. She had been told clearly that the East Wing was off-limits. She had nodded and immediately begun planning her first opportunity to investigate. The door was unlocked. That was the first strange thing. Inside, photographs, dozens of them, covering every surface, cities, faces, documents with entire sections blacked out, a corkboard that consumed a full wall, covered in red thread and names and photographs and connections she could feel before she could articulate, and in the center of the board, a photograph of her boss, the man who had sent her those files. She was still standing there, parsing the implications, when Alexei appeared in the doorway behind her. She braced for anger. Instead, he looked at the board, then at her. "How much can you read from that?" "Enough," she said carefully. "Your organization didn't send me those files. Someone used your channels without authorization. Someone inside your own network." She paused. "Someone who wants something to look like it came from you." A silence. "You got that from 30 seconds in this room." "I'm very good at my job." "Yes," he said, and something in his voice shifted. A quality she hadn't heard from him before. Not respect, exactly. Recognition. "You are." He didn't tell her to leave. He walked to the board, stood beside her, and for the next 2 hours, they worked through it together. Her translating the fragments he hadn't been able to place. Him filling in the operational gaps she couldn't see. 2 people who had no reason to trust each other, building something that required trust, because there was no other way to build it. She told herself it was survival. Stay useful. Stay alive. That night, returning a book to the library shelf nearest the study, she heard his voice through the open door. Different on the phone, lower, faster, stripped of everything that wasn't pure information. She's more useful than anticipated. A pause. No, not yet. Then, in a register she had never heard from him. Something that sat between finality and a warning that didn't need to be raised to be felt. If anyone touches her before I say so, I will consider it a personal problem. And you know what I do with personal problems. The call ended. Elena stood with the book pressed against her chest. Before I say so. She turned the phrase over in her mind for a long time, trying to decide which interpretation frightened her more, that it was a threat issued to protect her, or a reminder that somewhere, someone was still deciding what to do with her, and Alexei Volkov was among them. She went back to the library. She didn't sleep well that night. In the morning she looked at him across the breakfast table, and he looked back, and she thought, I don't know yet if I trust you. She thought, but I'm going to find out. On the 9th day, a car arrived unannounced. Elena watched from the library window. The woman who stepped out was the kind of beautiful that money and danger produce in combination, expensive, precise, aware of every eye on her in the way that comes not from vanity, but from years of operating in rooms where being underestimated was fatal. She walked into the villa like she owned half of it, which, Elena would later learn, she once had. Her name was Natasha, former associate of the Volkov organization. The exact nature of former something else was communicated clearly enough by the way Alexei's jaw tightened when he saw her cross the courtyard. Elena told herself it was none of her business. She lasted 40 minutes. She found them in the study. The door was open. She didn't mean to listen. She told herself that afterward, many times. She's seen too much, Natasha was saying. Whatever you think you're doing with her, what I do with her is not your concern. Alexei. A pause. The shift in tone was subtle but unmistakable, from colleague to something older, more complicated. She's a civilian. She has no idea what world she's standing in. You're keeping her like a pet, like a pretty thing for the shelf. Another pause. You know how this ends. I know exactly how this ends. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you're making a decision with your Natasha. One word. And the temperature in the hallway, Elena would have sworn, actually dropped. Leave by tonight. Silence. Then heels on marble, growing louder. Elena moved before the door opened. Down the hall, heart loud in her ears. A pretty thing for the shelf. She sat in the library for a long time. She stared at the wall. She told herself Natasha was wrong. That evening, Alexei came to the library. Whatever he saw in her face made him pause in the doorway. She's no one you need to worry about, he said. I'm not worried, Elena said. I'm thinking. About what? She looked up at him. About whether you see a difference between keeping something safe and keeping something caged. The silence that followed was long enough to mean something. Yes, he said finally. I see the difference. Good, she said. Then show me. She found out about the bounty by accident. 12 days in. A message buried in a business thread she was helping Alexei decode contained a phrase she recognized from the original files. A code construction, specific and deliberate. She decoded it in 4 minutes. There was a price on her head. Not because of what she knew, because of what someone believed she had already told Alexei. 3 organizations, 200,000 euros. Her hands were completely steady when she walked into his office without knocking and set the tablet on his desk. You knew about this. He looked at the screen, then at her. He didn't confirm or deny it, which was all the confirmation she needed. How long? Since the second day. She laughed. The sound came out strange, like something wrung from a place she didn't normally access. So I was never going to be able to leave. Even if you wanted me gone, they'd have found me within 24 hours. Yes, you should have told me. You weren't ready. That is not your decision to make. Every decision about your safety is my decision to make. He stood. Until this is resolved, you are under my protection. That is not a negotiation. I am a person, not a... You are a person I am choosing to keep alive. His voice didn't rise. It never rose. It simply got quieter, which was somehow worse, like a room getting colder without any wind. I need you to understand the difference between what I am doing and what they would do if they found you. I need you to understand that clearly. She stared at him across the desk. She understood it clearly. She hated how much sense it made. That night she couldn't sleep. She went to the kitchen at 2 in the morning and found Alexei already there, standing at the window with a glass of something dark, looking at the garden like it owed him an answer. She almost left. She didn't. She sat at the table. He refilled his glass and set a second one across from her without comment. They sat in silence for a while. The house was quiet in the way that large, heavily staffed houses become quiet after midnight. Not empty, but held. The man who set this up, she said finally. He works for you. Worked. She absorbed that. He wanted your name connected to those people on the list. Why? Alexei looked at his glass. Because the list names my successor. The organization has 2 possible futures after me. He prefers the other one. And the list itself, the politicians, the judges. A record of every arrangement my father made over 30 years, every payment, every favor called in and given. Enough to destroy half the Italian government and drag the Volkov name through the debris. A pause. My father was not a careful man. You took over from him. I removed him, Alexei said, from a position where his carelessness was going to get everyone killed. The words were flat, definitively final in the way of something that had been settled long ago and did not require revisiting. Elena looked at him. Removed. He met her eyes. He didn't look away. She thought about what that word meant when spoken in that tone by a man like this. She thought about what it meant to be 29 years old and make that decision. She thought about carrying it for 12 years and never flinching when you said it. The only way out is through, she said. Yes. She picked up her glass. Then tell me everything. Not what you think I need to know. Everything. Because I am apparently already inside this, and I would rather be useful than decorative. He looked at her for a long moment. That same quality of attention, that same sense of reading something carefully. Then he started talking. They had 12 days. 12 days working side by side in the forbidden room, mapping the network, tracing the money, building the case from the inside. 12 days of dinners that stretched past midnight because neither of them called it finished. 12 days of silences that had started to carry weight, the kind of weight that accumulates between 2 people who have stopped pretending they're strangers. Elena learned what kind of man Alexei Volkov actually was in those 12 days. Not the version she had feared. Not the version Natasha had described. The actual version. The one that existed when the performance was off and the door was closed and there was only the work and the quiet and 2 people who were better together at this particular problem than either was alone. And then, on the 13th night, the east wall of the villa exploded. She was in the library. She heard it before she felt it, a change in pressure, a sound like the world clearing its throat. And then she was on the floor with the lights out and plaster dust in her mouth, and the whole building rearranging its understanding of itself. Hands found her in the dark. She grabbed them without thinking. I have you. Alexei's voice, closer than she expected. Don't let go. She didn't let go. He moved through the house like he had memorized it in the dark. Which he had, she would realize later, because of course he had. She kept her hand in his and her focus on his back, and she did not think about what she was hearing in other parts of the building. They came out through the cellar, into the cold, into the garden, and that was where the man was waiting. He stepped out from behind the garden wall, one of the attackers, separated from the rest, who had found them before they found him. He had a gun. He raised it toward the nearest target, Elena. Everything stopped. She had time, in that suspended second, to notice strange things. The cold, the smell of smoke from the house, the particular quality of silence that descends when everyone present understands that something irreversible is approximately one decision away. And she had time to notice Alexei. She had spent weeks cataloging him, every register, every tell, the controlled face, the calculating face, the face he wore when he was 3 steps ahead of the room. She had built, over 12 days, a comprehensive map of a man who had spent 12 years learning to show nothing. She had never seen this face. He went completely still, but not the controlled stillness she knew. This was something different. This was the stillness of a man whose entire system had just failed him simultaneously. Like every calculation he had ever made, stopped processing at once because none of them had been built to cover this specific variable. "Don't," he said. One word. And his voice that never changed, that stayed low and final and in absolute command of every room it had ever entered, cracked on that single syllable. Like something that had been held under too much pressure for too long and had finally found the fracture point. The man with the gun looked at him, and even he, even a man who had been sent to this garden with a specific and violent purpose, paused, because he was no longer looking at Alexei Volkov, head of the most dangerous criminal organization in Europe. He was looking at something far less predictable than that. He was looking at a man who was afraid. "Don't," Alexei said again. And he stepped forward, toward the gun, toward the man holding it. He placed himself between Elena and the barrel, with no calculation behind the movement, no strategy, no plan. Nothing except the oldest and most devastating kind of instinct. The kind that doesn't ask permission. The man fired. He missed. In the noise and the dark and whatever he had seen in Alexei's face in that moment, his hand moved wrong and he missed. And then Alexei's men came around the corner and it was over in a matter of seconds. But Elena had seen it, the crack in the voice, the step forward with nothing behind it but fear. 3 seconds in which everything that Alexei Volkov had spent 12 years systematically removing from himself, every vulnerability, every weakness, everything that could be used against him, came flooding back through a single fracture point, her. Afterward, he stood with his back to her. When he turned around, his face was composed again. Every seam back in place, the mask rebuilt with the speed of long practice. But she had seen what was underneath it, and he knew that she had seen it. She crossed the cold garden and placed her hand against his chest, over his heart. She felt it through the fabric of his shirt, fast and real, and nothing at all like a man who had everything under control. "Are you hurt?" he said. His voice was steady again, almost. "No," she said. "Are you?" A long pause. "No," he said. She left her hand where it was. Neither of them moved. They moved to a safe house in the south before dawn. A stone farmhouse on a hillside. Lavender fields. 2 guards, nothing else. No villa, no library, no careful architecture of space between them. Just them. For the first 3 days he was on the phone constantly, rebuilding, redirecting, finishing what the attack had interrupted. Elena read on the farmhouse steps in the pale southern light and thought about Natasha's words. A pretty thing for the shelf. On the second morning, She found the note under her coffee cup. 8 words in Russian, in handwriting she didn't recognize. "There is a way out. I can help you." She stared at it for a long time. She thought about what it would mean: a number to call, a car, a border somewhere to the north, a return to the quiet, invisible life she had been living before a Tuesday night in October had rearranged everything. She folded the note and went to find Alexei. He ended his call the moment he saw her face. She put the note on the table. He read it. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very still, like a room after a sound has been made in it. "Irina," she said. "Yes." "She's been passing information the entire time." "I suspected. I wasn't certain." He looked at the note. "Now I am." "She's been with you for how long?" 14 years. The number sat between them like a stone. "What are you going to do?" she said. He was quiet, and in that silence, Elena saw something she had been trying to locate since the beginning. Not the controlled surface, not the operational precision, but the thing underneath all of it. The thing that existed in the space between the decision and the action. The weight that came from being the person who always had to decide, and always had to live with what they'd decided. "What I always do," he said. "And if I asked you not to?" He looked at her. "Would it matter?" she said. "What I asked." The silence lasted long enough for her to count her own heartbeats. 6. 7. "Yes," he said finally. "It would matter." She held his gaze. "Then handle it the way you need to. But remember that she's been with you 14 years. Whatever she became, she was also that." He said nothing. He picked up the note and left. She never saw Irina again. She didn't ask what had happened. She was learning in this world that some things existed in the space between what you needed to know and what you could carry without it changing you in ways you couldn't afford. That was the part nobody told you about. Not the danger. The choices. The ones without clean answers. The weight of them accumulated over years that explained why a man like Alexei Volkov had learned to be still. On the 4th day, he sat down next to her on the farmhouse steps. He held out an envelope. Her name on the front, in handwriting she hadn't seen before. His. "Before you tell me whether you're going home," he said, "I need you to read this." She took it. He stood and walked to the far end of the steps and stood with his back to her, and she understood without being told that he could not watch her read it. It took her 4 minutes. He had written it the night of the attack, after the garden, after her hand on his chest and the question, "Are you hurt?" and the answer that hadn't been entirely true. He had gone to his room in the farmhouse while she slept and written it by hand because there were things, the letter explained, that came out wrong when he tried to say them out loud. Things that required a kind of exposure he had spent 12 years methodically removing from himself because exposure was a liability and he had treated it accordingly. He had written, "I have not been afraid of anything in a very long time. I removed it. Fear is a liability in my world, and I treated it like one. I did not miss it." He had written, "When that man pointed the gun at you, I understood something I have no framework for. That all the things I removed to become what I am, I would give them back. Every advantage, every year of work, every decision that made me harder and more useful and more difficult to destroy. I would give all of it back if that was what it cost to have not brought you into this." He had written, "I chose you because you were exceptional. I kept you because I could not imagine the alternative." The first was strategy. The second is not. And at the very bottom of the page, in letters smaller than the rest, as if he had written them last, and almost hadn't included them at all. "I am not good at this. I am aware of that. But I would like, if you will allow it, to spend a significant amount of time getting better at it, specifically with you. If you decide to stay, not for safety, not because the alternative is worse, but because you want to, I will consider it the only thing I have ever been given that I did not take. Elena sat with the letter in her lap for a long time. The lavender moved in the wind. The light shifted across the hillside. Somewhere below, a bird made a sound and then stopped. She got up and walked to where he was standing. He turned when he heard her. And his face. She had never seen it like this. Not the controlled version. Not the operational version. Not the version that had been built over 12 years to withstand everything this world could throw at it. Just his face. Unguarded. Not because he had chosen to show her, but because he had simply run out of ways to hide. She held the letter out to him. "Keep it," he said. "I don't need it," she said. "I have it." She touched 2 fingers to her temple. His jaw tightened. Not with control, with something that had no name in the vocabulary of the man he had constructed himself to be. "Show me the years," she said, and that was all. They went back to Milan 6 weeks later. Not to the villa, to a new apartment, smaller, chosen by her, which surprised everyone who worked for him, and surprised Elena most of all, the choosing of it. She kept her translation work. She kept her languages. She began using them in ways she never had before. She also learned to read a room the way he read a room, to notice who moved wrong, to understand the specific weight of silence in certain conversations, to know when a meeting ended too quickly, what it meant. She became, slowly and with intention, someone who belonged in his world. Not because she had been remade, because she had always been built of this, the precision, the attention, the capacity to hold information without flinching and find the pattern underneath. She had simply spent 24 years without a context in which it mattered. She had one now. 3 months in, there was another attempt. A car, a busy street, broad daylight. Elena saw it before the driver did. She said one word, and Alexei moved before she finished saying it. Afterward, in the safe room, he looked at her with an expression she still didn't have a complete name for. "You saw it first," he said. "You trained me to look." "I didn't train you," he said. "You already knew how." She thought about the woman who had eaten lunch alone and told herself she preferred it. The life lived quietly at the margins, invisible by habit. "I was always this person," she said. "I just needed a reason to be her." He was quiet for a moment. "And I'm the reason," he said. "You're one of them." He almost smiled. She had seen him almost smile exactly 4 times in 3 months. She counted them. 8 months after a Tuesday night in October. A formal dinner. 40 people. The kind of room where everyone present had a price, a secret, or both. And everyone understood this about everyone else, and the understanding was the foundation on which the evening rested. Elena wore black. She spoke to a judge on her left in Italian, a shipping executive on her right in Russian, and she was halfway through a perfectly calibrated observation about Baltic trade routes when she felt it, the particular quality of attention that she had learned over 8 months to recognize across any distance. She looked up. Alexei was watching her from across the table, not checking on her, not assessing the room through her, just watching. The way you watch something you have decided belongs to you. Not owned, not controlled, but yours. Chosen. The way you watch something you would step in front of a gun for, without calculating whether it was a good idea. She held his gaze, and then she thought about the conversation she had overheard 3 weeks ago. 2 of his men in the kitchen of the Milan apartment talking quietly, not knowing she was on the other side of the door. The original file. The one that had started everything. She had spent 3 weeks with what she knew, turning it over, examining it from every angle, the way she examined any document placed in front of her. She had decided. After dinner in the car, the city lights moving past the window, she said without turning to look at him, "You knew about me before the file." Silence. "You knew who I was, what I could do." A pause. "You chose me." More silence. And then, very quietly, "Yes." She turned to look at him then. His face in the passing light was exactly as controlled as it always was, which by now she understood to mean something different than it had 8 months ago. "The traitor didn't find me by accident," she said. "Someone told him I was the right person, someone who knew I spoke Russian, who knew I was precise and careful and would understand exactly what I was reading, who knew that if I understood it, I'd have nowhere safe to go." She paused. "And who knew that the one place I could go, the one person with both the reason and the means to protect me, was you." He said nothing. "You needed a civilian in the middle of it," she said. "Someone credible. Someone with no connections to your world, who would be believed when they said what they'd seen. Someone who would need protecting, which would give you a reason to keep them close while you resolved the succession from the inside." She looked at him. "And you picked me." The car moved through the city. The lights moved through the windows. "Was any of it real?" she said. "The library, the conversations, the—" She stopped, found the word. "The letter." He turned to look at her, and she saw it. The weight. The same thing she had seen in the farmhouse kitchen when she had asked him to remember that Irina had been 14 years of something before she became a betrayal. The thing underneath the control. "All of it," he said. "Everything after that first night. All of it was real." A pause. "The plan was real too. Both things can be true at the same time." She looked at him for a long moment. "You put me in danger," she said. "I put you in danger with me present to manage it. The alternative was you in danger with no one. That's not a justification." "No," he said quietly. "It's an explanation. I know the difference." She turned back to the window. The city moved. Everything kept moving. "I'm angry," she said. "I know. I'm going to be angry for a while. I know. And then," she said, still looking at the lights, "I'm going to need you to tell me exactly what you saw when you chose me, what you knew that I didn't, what you decided about me before I had any say in it." She paused. "Because if I'm going to stay in this, and I am going to stay in this, that's not the question, then I need to know." A long pause. "Everything," he said. "I'll tell you everything." She moved her hand across the seat. His fingers closed around hers. Neither of them said anything else for the rest of the drive. Later that night, leaving a room full of people who had built their lives on the careful management of what they showed and what they hid, someone stopped Alexei to ask, with the specific casualness of someone who actually wanted to know, who she was. Alexei didn't look at the man. He looked at Elena. "She's with me," he said. 3 words. No title. No explanation, no performance. And Elena Voss, who had eaten lunch alone for years and called it preference, who had been taken from her apartment at 2 in the morning by men in black coats, who had been brought to a beautiful house and kept there and watched and protected and studied and chosen, felt something she had not been expecting. Not relief, not safety, not even love, though that was in it too, had been for a while. Certainty. She knew exactly where she was. She knew exactly who she was standing next to and what that meant in all its complexity and cost and danger. She knew what she was walking toward and what she was choosing to leave behind. And she had chosen it, fully. With every piece of information on the table, with her eyes open and her anger intact and her mind exactly as sharp as it had always been. He hadn't kept her as a trophy. He had kept her as the only person in his world he couldn't afford to lose. There is a difference. She walked toward him across the room, not because she had been broken, not because she had been worn down, not because she had forgotten what he had done. And she thought, I was always this person. I was always going to end up in a room like this, with a man like this, making a choice like this. I just didn't know it yet. She reached him. He looked at her the way he always had, like the most interesting problem he had ever encountered, like something he had no intention of solving, like something he planned to spend a very long time figuring out. We're going to talk more about this, she said quietly. I know, he said, a lot more. I know. She almost smiled. He almost smiled back. And they walked out into the Milan night together. Not clean, not simple, not safe in the way that ordinary people mean when they use that word, but together. Which, Elena Voss had learned, over the course of 8 months and one catastrophic Tuesday, was the only thing that had ever actually mattered. Written by Isis Maga Hart, C. 2026. All rights reserved.